Let me ask you something uncomfortable. You've read the books, you've watched the videos, you've listened to the podcasts about wealth, mindset, and success. And yet, if you're being honest with yourself, you're still not where you want to be financially. Still waiting, still planning, still telling yourself soon. Why? Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. It's not the strategy. It's not the market. It's not your background, your connections, or your timing. It's how you think about wealth itself. Most people treat getting rich like it's a mystery. Like there's some hidden door that opens for the lucky few, and the rest of us just have to wait and hope we get invited. So they spend their lives looking for shortcuts, chasing trends, asking for permission, and quietly resenting the people who already walked through that door. But here's the truth, and Ayn Rand saw this with absolute clarity decades ago. Wealth is not a mystery. It is not luck. It is not magic. Wealth is the predictable consequence of a specific way of thinking. And that way of thinking has a name. Howard Roark, the architect at the center of Rand's masterpiece, The Fountainhead, lived it completely. He never begged. He never compromised his competence for applause. He never traded his vision for someone else's approval. And he never felt guilty for wanting to build. That is the mindset we're going to break down today. In the next 25 minutes, you're going to understand why getting rich feels complicated, and why, once you adopt the right framework, the path forward becomes surprisingly clear. Not easy, but clear. Stay with me. So why does wealth feel so complicated? Because you were taught to think about money the wrong way, and that bad programming runs deeper than you realize. From the time you were a child, the messages came from every direction. Money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people are greedy. Don't be selfish. Be humble. Security is more important than ambition. And underneath all of it, a quiet but powerful assumption. Wanting more is suspicious. Wanting wealth, real wealth, not just comfort, means something is wrong with you morally. So what do most people do with that guilt? They don't kill the desire. They can't. The desire to build a better life is rational. It's human. Instead, they disguise it. They chase money while pretending they don't care about money. They want success but perform humility. They work hard but apologize for their ambition. They build, but only as far as social approval allows, and that internal contradiction destroys everything. Because when your actions and your beliefs are at war, you don't move forward with power. You move forward with one foot on the brake. You self-sabotage. You stop just short of the next level. You pick the safer option. You ask for permission you don't need. You wait for someone to tell you you're ready. Here's the other half of the problem, and this one is even more insidious. Most people confuse looking successful with being productive. They optimize for signals instead of substance. The right job title, the right lifestyle aesthetic, the right things to say at dinner. They spend enormous energy managing how they appear and almost no energy building something real. Ayn Rand had a word for this pattern. She called it second-handedness. Living through the eyes of others. Measuring your worth by external reaction instead of internal standard. And in The Fountainhead, she showed, with brutal precision, exactly where that path leads. Not to wealth, not to freedom, to dependence, to stagnation. To a life that looks fine from the outside and feels hollow from the inside. The confusion about wealth doesn't come from lack of information. You have access to more financial education today than any generation in history. The confusion comes from a philosophical error, a broken framework for understanding what money actually is, where it comes from, and what kind of person produces it. That's what we're correcting today. So what does Ayn Rand actually say about wealth? Let's start with the foundation, because Rand doesn't talk about money the way most people do. She doesn't give you a saving strategy or an investment formula. She does something far more important. She tells you what money is. In Atlas Shrugged, Francisco d'Anconia delivers one of the most precise definitions of money ever written. He says money is the product of virtue, not luck, not exploitation, not inheritance, virtue. Specifically, the virtue of production, of creating something real, of trading value for value without force and without fraud. Money, in Rand's framework, is a consequence. It follows competence, it follows creation. It follows the choice to produce rather than extract. Which means if you want to understand wealth, you don't start with money. You start with mindset, specifically the mindset of the builder. And nobody embodies that mindset more completely than Howard Roark. Now, Roark is an architect. But forget the profession for a moment. What makes Roark remarkable isn't what he builds. It's how he thinks. First, Roark operates from an internal standard. He doesn't ask what the market wants and then shape himself to fit. He develops a deep, rigorous mastery of his craft, and then he offers that mastery to the world on his own terms. He doesn't compromise his design to make a client comfortable. He doesn't dilute his vision to win approval. He builds what he believes is right with full technical competence, and he lets the work speak. This is not arrogance. This is integrity. And it is the first pillar of the Fountainhead Mindset. Second, Roark treats his work as the primary relationship. Not his reputation, not his network, not what people say about him at industry events. The work, the actual, concrete, physical output of his mind and effort. He pours himself into it completely, and that completeness is what eventually creates undeniable value. Most people do the opposite. They invest in optics and underinvest in substance. Roark reverses that equation entirely. Third, and this is the one that changes everything, Roark refuses to feel guilty for wanting to exist on his own terms. He doesn't apologize for his ambition. He doesn't shrink his goals to make others comfortable. He doesn't trade his long-term vision for short-term social approval. And when people resent him for it, and they do, he doesn't collapse. He doesn't retaliate either. He simply continues building. That psychological freedom, the absence of guilt around excellence, ambition, and prosperity, is not a personality quirk. In Rand's philosophy, it is a moral position. It is the recognition that your life belongs to you. That producing value is not something you should be ashamed of. That getting rich through real work, real competence, real contribution is not greed. It is the natural result of taking your own existence seriously. Now let's be precise about what this mindset is not. It is not recklessness. Roark is not impulsive. He thinks in long-time horizons. He accepts short-term hardship without complaint because he understands the logic of compounding, that consistent, high-quality output eventually becomes impossible to ignore. It is not antisocial. Roark trades with people. He serves clients. He builds for the world. He just refuses to let the world dictate the terms of how he builds. And it is not elitism. The Fountainhead Mindset is available to anyone willing to make the same commitments. To competence, to honest production, to long-term thinking, and to the moral right to keep what you earn. 3 pillars: internal standard, substance over optics. No guilt for excellence. That is the architecture of the wealth mindset. Now let's see what it looks like in the real world. Theory is only useful when it changes behavior. So let's put the Fountainhead Mindset into 3 real situations, the exact places where most people leak their potential without even noticing. Application 1. Social influence and the people around you. Meet Marcus. Smart guy. Genuinely talented in his field, digital product development. He has ideas, he has skills, and somewhere in the back of his mind he has a number. A real financial goal. Not a fantasy. A calculated, achievable target. But Marcus has a problem. His social circle is comfortable. Not successful, comfortable. They have stable jobs, predictable weekends, and a shared vocabulary for why big ambitions are risky, naive, or, their favorite word, unrealistic. So Marcus learns to edit himself. He stops mentioning the business he's building. He laughs along when someone makes a joke about hustle culture. He shrinks his timeline. He lowers his stated goals to match the ceiling of the room he's in. And every time he does that, something small dies. Here's what Rand would identify immediately. Marcus is practicing second-handedness in real time. He is allowing the emotional comfort of his social group to set the upper limit of his ambition. He is outsourcing his standard of success to people who have already decided not to aim higher. The Fountainhead Mindset says something different. It says, you do not owe your social circle a smaller version of yourself. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or dismissive. It means you stop performing modesty you don't feel. Stop apologizing for goals you haven't abandoned, and stop confusing loyalty with self-limitation. Roark didn't lecture his peers. He didn't try to convert them. He simply refused to let their ceiling become his ceiling, and he kept building. If you're at a point where the people around you are consistently pulling your ambition downward, that is not a relationship problem. That is a philosophical problem. And the solution is not to find better people first. The solution is to become clearer about your own standard first. The right people follow that clarity. Application 2. Family and the pressure for security. Now let's talk about the one that hits closer to home. Sarah grew up in a household where financial stability was treated as the highest value. Not wealth, stability. Her parents worked steady jobs, kept their heads down, never took risks, and communicated one message with remarkable consistency. Don't reach too far, or you'll fall. Sarah internalized that message completely. Now, at 32, she has a skill set that could generate real income independently. She has a side project that's already producing small but growing revenue. She has a plan. But every time she gets close to committing fully, every time she's about to make the decision that would actually change her trajectory, her family's voice shows up in her head. What if it doesn't work? What about benefits? What will you do if you fail? We just want you to be safe. And she hesitates every time. Here's what Rand would say about this, and it's important to hear it clearly without misreading it as coldness. Your family's fear is real. Their concern, in most cases, is genuine. But genuine concern delivered as guilt is still guilt, and guilt is not a rational argument. It is an emotional lever. When someone says, "I just want you to be safe," in response to your ambition, they are not giving you data. They are giving you their anxiety and asking you to carry it instead of them. The Fountainhead Mindset does not mean abandoning your family. It means refusing to let someone else's fear set the upper limit of your life. Roark's mentor, Henry Cameron, watched the architecture world collapse around conventional thinking. He didn't survive it gracefully. But he told Roark the truth. Build what you know is right, regardless of whether the world is ready, not out of rebellion, out of respect for your own judgment. The practical application here is straightforward. You can love your family completely and still make decisions they don't understand. You can be grateful for what they gave you and still refuse to replicate their ceiling. Those two things are not in conflict, unless you've been taught they are. Security built on someone else's definition of safe is not security. It is a slow surrender. Application 3. Work and the creation of real value. This is where the mindset either produces results or stays theoretical. James works in marketing. Good at his job, technically proficient, reliable, well-liked by his team. He gets solid performance reviews, modest raises, and zero sense that his financial future is accelerating in any meaningful direction. The problem isn't his skill. The problem is his model. James is optimizing for compliance, doing what's expected, staying within the lane, not creating friction. He measures his success by whether his manager is happy. He waits to be assigned interesting projects instead of proposing them. He does his work, then stops. In Rand's framework, James is a competent worker. But he is not a producer. And those are two different things. A producer doesn't just complete tasks. A producer identifies what creates value, real, measurable, undeniable value, and then builds a systematic capacity to generate more of it. A producer thinks like an owner even before owning anything. A producer's internal question is never, "What's expected of me?" It's, "What's worth building here?" The Fountainhead mindset applied to work means treating your career the way Roark treated architecture. Not as a service you perform for others' approval, but as a craft you develop with full seriousness, directed by your own judgment about what is genuinely excellent. This has a practical translation. It means developing skills that compound, skills that become more valuable as they combine with each other. It means building output that exists independently of your hours, writing, systems, products, processes that work when you aren't working. It means protecting your productive time with the same discipline Roark protected his drafting table. And critically, it means accepting full responsibility for your results. Not blame, responsibility. The distinction matters. Blame looks backward and looks for external causes. Responsibility looks forward and asks, what is within my control, and what will I do with it? When James shifts that one internal question, from am I doing what's expected? To, am I building something of real value? His relationship to work changes completely. Not because the job changed. Because he changed. That shift is available to anyone. But it requires rejecting the secondhand standard, the idea that your value is determined by what others assign to you, and replacing it with a first-hand one. I produce. I create. I trade value for value, and I'm not ashamed of the results that follow. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Because whenever Rand's ideas get applied to wealth and ambition, two objections show up with remarkable consistency. Let's address both of them directly. Objection 1. This sounds like it ignores luck and privilege. Not everyone starts from the same place. This is the most common pushback, and on the surface it sounds reasonable. Some people are born into wealth, some people face real structural disadvantages. Isn't it naive or worse, cruel, to say that mindset is the primary factor? Here's the honest answer. Starting conditions are real. Nobody serious denies that circumstances differ. Some people begin with more resources, more connections, more safety nets. That is simply true. But here's what this objection consistently conflates. Starting position with trajectory. Rand's argument, and the evidence that supports it, is not that everyone starts equal. It's that the mindset of production, long-term thinking, and rational self-direction changes trajectory regardless of starting position. Not instantly, not without friction, but predictably over time. The people who use unequal starting conditions as a permanent explanation for stagnation are making a philosophical error. They are treating an external fact, where they began, as a fixed ceiling rather than a variable they can work against. That's not realism. That's surrender dressed as analysis. Roark started with nothing. No family connections in architecture. No inherited reputation. He was rejected, dismissed, and financially broke for years. What he refused to surrender was his standard, his internal commitment to building things of genuine quality. And that refusal, sustained over time, became impossible to ignore. Luck exists. Privilege exists. Neither one is a substitute for the mindset, and neither one, in the long run, defeats it. Objection 2. Rand's philosophy is just selfishness. It produces people who don't care about others. This one comes up constantly, and it reveals a fundamental misreading of what Rand actually argued. When Rand defends rational self-interest, she is not defending the person who lies, manipulates, or exploits others to get ahead. In fact, she is deeply hostile to that type. In her framework, a person who gains wealth through force or fraud has not achieved anything. They have extracted value they didn't create. And that is the opposite of the productive mindset she admires. Rational self-interest, as Rand defines it, means taking your own life and well-being seriously as a primary moral value and pursuing that through production, through honest trade, through genuine contribution. Not at the expense of others. Through offering something real that others voluntarily choose to exchange for. Howard Roark builds extraordinary buildings. His clients get extraordinary buildings. Nobody is exploited. Value is created and exchanged. That is not selfishness in the destructive sense. That is the trader principle. Mutual benefit through honest production. The person Rand criticizes is not the ambitious producer. It's the person who extracts, who gains through manipulation, dependency, or guilt rather than through creation. In Rand's moral framework, the manipulator and the parasite are far more dangerous to society than the person who builds wealth honestly and keeps it. So when someone tells you that wanting to be wealthy is selfish in a bad way, ask them to be precise. Are they saying you shouldn't produce value? That you shouldn't keep what you earn? That your ambition harms others simply by existing? Because if that's the argument, it's not an ethical critique, it's a guilt mechanism. And you've already learned what to do with those. Let's make this concrete. Because philosophy without a before and after picture is just theory. I want you to meet two versions of the same person. Same age, same starting income, same city, same general level of intelligence. The only difference is the framework they use to navigate financial decisions. Before, the second-hand thinker Daniel is 34. He works in software, good salary, stable position, respected by his team. On paper, he looks fine. But Daniel's financial life is quietly stalled. He spends most of what he earns, not recklessly, but on things that maintain an image of success rather than build one. The right apartment in the right neighborhood. The right car. The right wardrobe for the right impression. His expenses track his income almost perfectly, which means his net worth barely moves. He has ideas, real ones. A product he's thought about building for 3 years. A consulting offer he turned down twice because the risk felt too high. A skill he keeps meaning to develop but hasn't prioritized because the immediate return isn't obvious. When people ask how things are going, Daniel says good, and he means it, in the narrow sense that nothing is catastrophically wrong. But underneath that word is a persistent unease. The feeling that time is passing, that the window for real change gets smaller every year. And that at some point stable stops being a neutral description and becomes a quiet sentence. Daniel isn't lazy. He isn't stupid. He is trapped by a framework that measures success by external validation and treats ambition as something to manage rather than something to build. He is waiting without quite knowing what he's waiting for. After, the Fountainhead thinker now meet Daniel, same person 18 months later, one shift. He stopped asking, what will people think? And started asking, what do I know how to build? He launched the product. Not perfectly, the first version was rough, the early traction was slow, and two people he respected told him it wouldn't work. He noted their feedback, evaluated it against his own judgment, kept what was useful and discarded what wasn't. He didn't need their approval to continue. He needed his own assessment that the direction was rational. He restructured his expenses, not out of deprivation, out of clarity. He stopped paying for signals and started investing in assets. Skills that compound, output that exists independently of his hours. A financial cushion that gives him the freedom to make decisions from strength rather than desperation. He had difficult conversations with his family, who still worry, and with friends who quietly resented the change in his priorities. Those conversations were uncomfortable. He had them anyway. He didn't perform modesty, he didn't feel. He didn't shrink his goals to manage their anxiety. He stayed calm, stayed direct, and stayed on course. 18 months in, Daniel is not rich. Not yet. But his trajectory is different, fundamentally, structurally different. His net worth is moving, his skill base is expanding. His options are multiplying. And the unease is gone, replaced by something that feels unfamiliar at first, and then becomes the only acceptable way to operate. That feeling is called earned confidence. It doesn't come from success. It comes from the decision to produce seriously, think independently, and refuse to apologize for either. The equation here is the simplest version of everything we've covered today. Mindset generates decisions. Decisions generate actions. Actions generate value. Value generates wealth. That chain is not magical. It is not mysterious. It is not reserved for the lucky or the connected or the specially gifted. It is available to anyone willing to make the same commitment Roark made. Not to the world's approval, but to their own standard of excellence. The reason wealth feels complicated is that most people interrupt the chain somewhere in the middle. They make decisions based on fear instead of judgment. They take actions optimized for appearance instead of output. They create value but apologize for keeping it. Remove those interruptions one by one, with clarity and consistency, and the path becomes exactly what Rand said it was. Simple, demanding, and completely within your control. Let's bring this home. We started with a question: why does getting rich feel so complicated? And the answer, when you trace it back to its root, is not what most people expect. It's not the economy, it's not your background. It's not timing or connections or the randomness of fortune. It's a framework. A broken, inherited, unexamined framework that treats wealth as suspicious, ambition as selfish, and the desire to build a better life as something that needs to be justified to the people around you. Ayn Rand, through Howard Roark, through Francisco, through every producer she ever wrote, offered a different framework. One that starts with a simple but radical premise. Your life is yours. Your judgment is yours. And the wealth that follows from honest, rigorous, unapologetic production is not something you should feel guilty for pursuing or keeping. The Fountainhead Mindset is not a hack. It is not a shortcut. It is a commitment to internal standards over external approval, to substance over optics, to long-term production over short-term comfort. 3 pillars. Build from an internal standard. Invest in substance, not signals. Remove the guilt around excellence. Apply those 3 consistently in how you work, in how you protect your time, in how you respond to the people who benefit from your self-doubt, and the path to wealth stops being mysterious. It becomes what it always was, a logical consequence of the right decisions, made repeatedly without apology. This is not a promise that it will be easy. Roark's path was not easy. It will require you to disappoint people who are counting on your limitation. It will require you to make decisions that look strange from the outside and feel completely clear from the inside. It will require a kind of patience that isn't passive. It's the active, disciplined patience of someone who understands that compounding takes time and refuses to be rushed into mediocrity. But here's what I can tell you with certainty. The version of you that operates from this framework, that builds seriously, thinks independently, and refuses to trade integrity for applause, that version of you generates results. Real ones, measurable ones. The kind that don't disappear when the trend changes or the market shifts, because they're built on something that doesn't shift. Your actual competence, your actual output, your actual value. That is what wealth is. That is where it comes from. And now you know how to build it. If this way of thinking resonates with you, if you're starting to see your own life through a sharper lens, then the next episode is going to hit even closer to home. We're talking about the people closest to you, your family. Specifically, the 7 things you should never tell them, because in the wrong hands, that information doesn't stay information. It becomes leverage. It becomes guilt. It becomes the exact mechanism we talked about today, used against the life you're trying to build. That episode is called Never Tell Your Family These 7 Things, and if today's conversation made sense to you, that one will complete the picture. Subscribe to the Ram Lens and keep seeing life more clearly.